Now, something that you've touched on in the book and in this conversation is the concept of whether deliberately or just institutionally deafened ears of the new elite. And the new elite seem to be a product of the university system. They seem to be a product of the Blairite paradigm, how he would assert that any dissent against mass immigration or managerial neoliberalism is retrograde because it's as inevitable as the seasons. How deliberate was the construction of the new elite, and who exactly are they? What are their values?
Yeah, so the new elite are basically the people who are running the country, not just politically, but in media, creative industries, cultural institutions, the knowledge class, universities, schools. Basically they're university graduates. They've gone through the elite institutions, Oxbridge, Russell Group. Their parents tend to also belong to the graduate class or tend to be fairly affluent professionals, managers. They tend to live in the big cities, university towns. And crucially, unlike the old elite, they lean left on lots of cultural questions. So they've basically embraced radical progressivism, not just social liberalism. They've essentially gone quite woke in how they see the world. They're very present on social media. They disproportionately dominate many of the institutions, BBC, newspapers, museums, galleries. And they are really adept at using that economic, social, and cultural power to basically project their values onto everybody else, to magnify their voice, and to exclude or stigmatize the values and the voice of many other people in society. So cultural conservatives, gender critical folks, and so on. So the new elite are basically reshaping the national conversation around their group. Now, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about Britain is because, 20 years ago, that would have had much greater consequences. Today, however, the new elite are increasingly being challenged by an alternative ecosystem, right? The YouTube channels, the Substacks, the alternative platforms, the new TV channels, the news channels, outside of the BBC and so on. And I think the new elite can sense that. I think they can sense that, look, they're actually beginning to suffer losses. 1.7 million people have stopped watching Radio 4 Today since Brexit. The media landscape is massively fragmenting. Some of the biggest selling books over the last year, I'm happy to say, including my own, Nigel Biggar's book on colonialism, Hannah Barnes's book on Tavistock, publishers are realizing, hang on a minute, there's an audience out here that doesn't just want to be told, woke 101 all the time, every day. They want something different. So I'm a little bit optimistic in that I can sense that the power of the new elite is being challenged. But, as we've learned over the last decade, what they will do when they are challenged is they will double down. And they will double down and move to try and cement their power and cement their voice at the expense of other people in society. And so I think, if we end up with a Labour government, Labour minority government, Labour coalition, Labour majority, I suspect the volume is going to go up on all this. We're going to have, racial equality legislation. We're going to have, God knows what's going to be going on in schools with kids and all the stuff that you can see in other parts of the UK. I suspect that's going to be mainstreamed. And this is going to get ugly. It's going to get really, really ugly because there are lots of mums and dads out there who are looking at these political belief systems being imposed on their kids and asking very understandable questions, which is, where's the science for this? Seriously, where's the science for this? Why is my 11-year-old being taught how to choke their partner during sex? Why is my kid being taught there are 73 genders? This isn't science, right? This is a political belief system. So can we have a conversation about this as a country? In fact, let's not have a conversation, right? Let's have it out. Let's have a real political battle over this issue. Because when people say, oh, this is a low salience issue, nobody cares about this issue. Nobody cares about gender identity theory. You know what I say? I say, look at America.
Yeah.
Nobody used to care about it then until people started talking about it. Look at Scotland. Nobody cared about it until they started looking at what the SNP were about to do, which was crazy. And when they did, 80% of Scots said, I don't really want that to happen. So one of the key points in this book is radical progressivism is basically the worldview of max 15 to 20% of the country, max, right? So when you saw, for example, Gary Lineker, right, saying, oh, it's terrible, government's immigration policies are terrible, and everybody on Twitter says, oh, wow, this guy's speaking for the majority. He's not. He's speaking for like 20%. And so where I think the balance has come unstuck is because progressives dominate the institutions and Twitter, we often think they're projecting or representing the majority view, when in fact, usually their beliefs are held by 1 in 5 people, max. So conservatives who shy away from those battles are shooting themselves in the foot, because if they turn up the volume on some of those, they're going to find a very receptive audience.
Yeah, so it's not just the issues as well. It's that we can take lessons from our enemies in how to use power to conserve the culture that they are deliberately trying to erode. There's a principle from a book called The Populist Illusion, which says that essentially the organized minority will always triumph over the fragmented, disorganized majority, even if the majority has true convictions.
Well, we did that on the higher education bill. I've had calls from all over the world, like, how did you guys get this bill through? This is one of the first pieces of legislation that defends academic freedom in universities. How did you do it? You must have had a grassroots social movement. I'm like, no. We had like a dozen people.
Yeah.
But who were disciplined, organized, committed, experts in their field. If you want to bring about serious change, right, you basically need political advisors, you need lawyers, you need campaigners, and you need people who know that topic inside and out. And if you get those people in the room, forget the new party, forget the social movement, forget the 10 million clicks online, you get those people in a room with an objective, dynamite follows, right? That's a lesson of the last 3 years in my life. If you get organized on these issues and you get the right people in the room who will give up time to do this for no other purpose than they believe in it, then you're going to change the game.
So here's maybe a question to drill down on the values of the new elite. How sincere are their convictions? Because at one point in the book, you critiqued some academic's book called The Tyranny of Merit, which
Michael Sandel. Actually, I like that book.
Right. Okay. So one of the critiques that you seem to level at it was that the insular belief system of progressivism inculcated by university is a kind of tribal signifier for the privilege of the new elite to share amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And by putting that as a dominant paradigm within the university, they're pulling the ladder up after themselves, socially speaking.
Yeah.
So how sincere are our elites as true believers of trans ideology, for example? Or is this just something they nod along with to get a job?
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been influenced a lot by people who have worked on things like social status, elite formation. I know you've had Rob Henderson on the show before. Rob's a great guy, and he's been really influential in my thinking. I mean, look, I think what's going on here is what's going on is that the elite in this country used to use money, estates, titles, wealth to project their status and their social honor. Private members clubs on Pall Mall.
Yep.
What's going on now is a new elite are using their luxury beliefs, radical progressivism, wokeism, to signal to other elites that they're high status and are advocating beliefs that are low cost to them, like mass migration, open borders, fluid families, gender identity theory, but which impose enormous costs on other people in society, especially people who rely on national identity, strong families, our history, our values as a really important source of status. So what the new elite essentially is doing is tearing down the cultural guardrails, right? I mean, what liberalism is doing, let's call it what it is, social liberalism, is tearing down the cultural guardrails. It's got a ratchet effect inbuilt into it. It has to constantly break the chains, right? Whether that's related to, sex and gender identity, whether it's related to revising our national history, whether it's related to, sort of transhumanism, whether it's related to, the end of marriage or, all the ascribed identities that we used to cherish. They want to basically dilute those, erode those, and just ideally get rid of them. So then the individual is just standing there, free from obligation, free from ties, free from responsibilities, and is standing there as a kind of like, sovereign, lemming that doesn't really have any obligation to anybody else, right? And then what follows is like endless loneliness and deaths of despair and slow motion suicides and rising levels of mental health problems among our young people, because nobody has any meaning anymore, nobody has any purpose, and nobody has any collective sense of self. So, you can see this across the board. I'll give you one example. In the aftermath of NatCon, watching kind of liberal progressives on Twitter and media lose, am I allowed to swear on this show, but lose their shit.
Yeah.
I was kind of laughing because the biggest thing that really riled them was that there were all these people talking about the importance of family.
Yeah.
They were saying, how dare they talk about family, keeping families together, mum and dad looking after the kids until they're adults, and having governments that have pro-family policies. This is like retrograde. This is 1950s. This is reactionary. This is fascism. And I'm sort of looking at this, like, my parents divorced when I was 5. I mean, the idea that family formation is something we should just not talk about is like ridiculous. The evidence is overwhelming. And the evidence is clear, right? I mean, mum and dad leave, and you're raised by a single parent. The chances of you going to prison are off the charts, getting arrested, doing badly at school, becoming a drug addict, becoming an alcoholic. You're basically put in a really bad position from day one of mum or dad leaving. And about 43% of 18-year-olds in this country right now, about 43% of kids are not living with mum and dad by the time they turn 18, right? So that's why we have some of the highest rates of family breakdown in the Western world, right? And it's why NatCons want to talk about it, because it's critically important. And to be blunt, even if you wanted to use the language of the new elite, if you want a big return on investment, if you want a really good economic return, which is not even the most important part of all this, then have strong families, because the return is enormous. You want to solve the housing crisis? Encourage people to stay together, right? Don't encourage them to break off and, go their separate ways. I mean, it just feeds into absolutely everything. And I think what struck me about in the reaction to the conference is you had a lot of people from the new elite who, ironically, are the most likely to get married, stay married, have kids while married, basically slating everybody else off for talking about the importance of family formation. So there is a hypocrisy that comes with the new elite, which really stinks. And when you call it out, they hate it. I mean, the reaction to this book has been revealing. I mean, they're basically hypocrites. Do they believe the things they're saying? Sometimes. Are those things more importantly an indicator of status as they see it, that they're projecting to other members of the elite to acquire more status for themselves? Absolutely. Many members of the new elite are pretty conventional in how they live, but the moment they go online, they're like, Princess Pocahontas, and they're sort of like screaming from the rooftops about how they love all these, mad ideas that are being imported from other parts of the world. And I just think calling that out is the first step in getting back to a sensible conversation like family, which is critically important. Because if we don't keep families together, as you know, and we don't start having more kids, 50 years from now, we're going to have some major, major, major problems.
Yeah, well, I just spoke to Stephen Shaw. By the time this discussion's out, it will be on the website. And he was the gentleman that was just cancelled from Cambridge trying to screen his film. My friend invited him, and just falling outside of the bill, they got no method of redress for it. But he investigated over the course of 7 years in pretty much every country that even sub-Saharan Africa is trending the same way of demographic decline that the UK is.
Yeah.
In your book, I actually cited the statistic to him, funnily enough. Cross-pollination. 2020, there's more pensioners than there were newborns.
Yeah.
Similar things just happening in India, Bangladesh. They're trending the same way. And so by 2050, there's going to be 800 million people who succumb to unplanned childlessness. They wanted children, but they never had them. And the impacts of that on the economy, on personal meaning, on social stability is going to be devastating. And so we do need to get a hold of this.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, I've even stopped short, partly in this book, of going full on into the discussion around birth rates and population, largely because the book really isn't about that. I will look at it in more detail in the future. But, if you just look at how Britain's population now has been reshaped, the biggest driver of population growth in this country now is migration.
Yeah.
And if you want some estimates, then by 2040, we're going to have somewhere around 5 million more people in the country, which is equivalent to about 5 Birminghams, around about that. And And nobody yet has given me a reasonable, satisfactory answer to how on earth we're going to accommodate this population growth over the longer term within a National Health Service, housing sector, welfare state, and economy that is already creaking, if not collapsing. Because the answer, we need people to do jobs, sort of ignores the fact that those people also get old, and those people also need support, and those people also need resources. So what I would like to see is a sustainable long-term plan for how we're going to manage this country. And that plan cannot simply be rooted in how to drive the economy. It also has to be rooted in things that politicians are utterly crap at talking about, like how we can motivate and give people a sense of happiness and peace, how we can slow down social and cultural change so we can protect who we are and pass on that cultural inheritance.